for questions and answers. So that's the way we plan to do it. Coming from DG Connect, I should know how to move a slide. This is the Digital Single Market Review. I think some of it you have heard already about today. I mean, Vice President Ansip, Roberto Viola talked a lot about, say, what we were doing, what our priorities were, but maybe it's useful just to put it all a little bit together in a hopefully coherent framework. So that's the objective. As further colleagues, friends, people join us, so maybe we should allow them to take a seat. In the meantime, I'm trying to see if I can operate this thing. Yes. Good. Well, midterm review. 2 years ago, just a bit more than 2 years ago, we had the DSM strategy. And so it's quite a good time 2 years later to see how are we doing. So that's the purpose behind the midterm review, just to refresh your memory if necessary. There were kind of 16 initiatives in the DSM strategy in 2015, 35 proposals, and then there are some further actions to which we will come. So a lot of the work is now in the Council and the Parliament. There's lots of negotiations going on. We heard today about the Maltese presidency already managing to, together with the European Parliament, to get quite a few of these measures agreed and adopted, but there's many more that need to be agreed in the next, hopefully, couple of days, even as far as geo-blocking is concerned, but then certainly the next 6 months. No, I'm going back. It's not good. Voila. So why did we do a midterm review? Well, as I said, to take stock, but also because there are a number of issues which, I mean, when we looked at them 2 years ago, we weren't entirely clear in our mind what needed to be done. We saw them. They were big enough, but we didn't really have yet a policy. So that's where we spent a bit of time to refine our thinking, also to work very closely with member states, with the Parliament, with stakeholders. We did public consultations, and that's like what we call here the future agenda. Ensuring a fair, open, and secure digital environment. These 3 issues, and I will come back to these 3 issues, are actually issues on which we are working very hard now with a view to making proposals between now and the end of the year. In some cases, that even involves some legislation. So that's the kind of really short term. I mean, we used 2 years to understand it better, to come to grip with the issues, and now we're ready to come forward in the next couple of months with tangible proposals. The second one, managing the digital transformation, is something that I think we can all see as being very important today. There was a lot of discussion about skills, digitization of industry, particularly also the small and medium-sized enterprises, the huge potential there is in e-health and public services and mobility, transport, and also the need to have top-class infrastructure in Europe, which includes high-performance computing. So those are areas where, I mean, clearly they will be getting greater priority. It's going to be more on a kind of case-by-case basis. In the area of digital skills, obviously, there's a lot of responsibility here for the member states, for the regions, for the social partners. We, as European Union, we have a role to play to facilitate, but obviously, I mean, we don't have the competences to do much more than we're doing at the moment. Digitization of industry, again, is an important responsibility for the industry itself, for the member states. Many member states have their own digitization of industry programs, and so we try to kind of identify best practices and stimulate. E-health is interesting, we'll come to that, but that's where we think maybe with a smaller group of countries, a smaller group of member states, we can pioneer, we can move forward, we can kind of experiment a bit, and then other member states, as they are kind of getting ready and more interested, they can join. So we'll come to that. I also wanted to point to you that, of course, what we do at the EU level is very important, and that's what the DSM strategy is all about. But what member states do is, of course, equally important, if maybe sometimes not more important. And we do measure that. You heard today a lot the reference to DAISY, It's not a GIRL, I mean, it's a Digital Economy and Society Index where we measure the performance of the member states on 5 dimensions, from connectivity to skills to kind of the industry use, public services, I mean, how people kind of interact with the internet. And then we also give some advice to the member states that where they maybe need to do a little more. So it's very important that member states also, of course, in the areas under their own control, move forward, and we all move forward more or less at the same level, because if you have an internal market and one member state has relatively poor connectivity and another has high connectivity, I mean, that does not help the effective functioning of the single market. Well, this is what you get if you try to put 4 slides into 1 slide. I don't know, I find it very difficult to read, but this is, we do regularly these Eurobarometer surveys, so we ask people, what do you think? We don't do it, but we have firms who do that. And so this is what we ask people, what do you think about digitization? What do you think about digital health? I mean, do you have enough trust? What about cybersecurity? You can see most people think digitization is a positive thing, which is good. Many people think that healthcare also should be moved into the digital age, which is also good. And then here the social networks, kind of, I mean, how much do you trust it? You see that the trust is rather variable. And the cybersecurity is really something that people worry about. So it's kind of, for us, important to know also what people think and what they feel when we do policy. Well, this is where we are. This is the kind of the scorecard for the Maltese presidency. Looks pretty good. We talked about those. Well, the data economy. These are the things that we are working on now, with which there'll be some output in the next couple of months, and we've been quite intensive. We did, for example, on data, we did a public consultation from January until May. I'm sure many of you have contributed to that. So why are we looking into the data economy? Well, that's obvious, because there's a huge opportunity there for Europe, not just in terms of GDP and value, but in terms of getting solutions to problems which so far have proven to be rather intractable. I mean, if you look at climate change, health challenges, congestion issues, I mean, data is going to be an enormous source for kind of finding solutions to these difficult problems. So what will we do? And that's what I will kind of concentrate on. I probably need to move a little quicker here, but I mean, free flow of data. I mean, this is very important to Vice President Ansip. I mean, every other sentence he speaks, I mean, he says something about free flow of data, so it's very close to his heart. Something that we already announced in the DSM strategy 2 years ago, so why hasn't it not happened yet? Because there's some complexities, but now the Commission clearly sees a way forward, and so we will be preparing, or we are preparing, a legislative initiative together with an impact assessment for adoption by the College, tentatively planned for the 6th of November. So this is quite a tight timetable for us. We're looking at 3 issues. One issue is obviously the geolocalization. And the issue is maybe not so much about the barriers that already exist. I mean, we found evidence of barriers that exist. So this is not a kind of a problem that's a theoretical problem. There's a practical problem there as well. But it's more to create a legal certainty. So we want to avoid a situation where there's going to be more problems or legal insecurity in the future. I mean, there's major investments that need to be made, and if companies are going to invest putting data into data centers, they need to know what the legal framework is going to look like. So the geolocalization is something that we will address. Of course, there's always be a possibility for member states with justified reasons for public order or public security to impose certain requirements on those who have or control the data. The other element, and this has come out from a kind of structured dialogue which we had with the member states, is that of course member states have legitimate grounds to, I mean, they need access to data. They need to fulfill their responsibilities under the law, whether it's in banking or whether it's in taxation or in other areas. So how can we make sure that this free flow of data does not inhibit or does not restrict in any way the ability of member states to fulfill to meet the legal requirements that apply, whether they're EU or national. So we are looking into kind of mutual assistance, ways where member states can actually help each other to get access to data that is maybe no longer stored on their own territory. This, of course, is a principle which also exists in other in other fields. The third area we're looking at, it's a bit more complicated, is portability in the context of cloud. Because if you have the principle of free flow of data, but then in practice it's very difficult to actually move your data out of one cloud into another cloud, then the free flow of data principle exists on paper but not in practice. So we're looking at that. We have good experiences with portability in a number of areas. For example, in telecommunications or in energy, where it's quite easy also for us as a consumer to move from one provider to another provider. Here it's a little bit more complicated, but it is something that we're looking at in the context of the impact assessment. The impact assessment is being prepared now. We will need to go to the board sometime in September. We're also looking at the second initiative for the spring of 2018. We want to make sure that there is as much data available to be used as possible. And of course, public data in principle should be made even more available. We have already made some good progress through the PSI directive, as we call it, the Public Sector Information Directive, but we think there is further to go. So that's something which we will do by spring 2018, most likely in the form also of a legal measure. And the last thing we will do, and these are just complicated, very complicated issues, but we need to crack them, is what do you do with ownership issues, access issues, liability issues? If we have a self-driving car or a connected car and something goes wrong, who should be held liable if it deals with data? Is it the one who's developed the software? Is it the one who sold the car? Is it the driver? Is it the one who services the car? So there are very important legal questions that need to be sorted out before this potential can be reaped. So that's on data. It's one of 3 work streams. The other one is platforms, and the third one is cybersecurity. So this is what we're working on now, a proposal in the course of November. Cybersecurity, well, we heard it today, and I think we all are fully aware of the threats of cybersecurity. You see some statistics on top. So what is the EU going to do in the next couple of months? Well, we need to review our cybersecurity strategy. The cybersecurity strategy dates back to 2013. The world was a different place in 2013 than it is today, so it needs to be updated. And this is both what we do internally in the European Union, but also, of course, what we do with our partners around the world. And sometimes some of our partners may not always be friendly partners in this area. So that's something that we are working on with the European External Action Service, with DG Home, and DG Connect, and the timing for this is before the State of the Union speech of President Juncker. The State of the Union speech, I think, is on the 12th or the 13th of September. So that's something we're working on. We also need to update the mandate of ENISA. ENISA is the only agency in the European Union that has a fixed time frame. So if it's not extended, it will stop, and so that's already by 2020. So we need to act in that area, also to align the ENISA, the agency in Greece, to the new requirements under the NIS directive, the Network and Information Security Directive. We heard a lot about connected objects, and we heard connected objects being used for distributed denial of services, attacks, etc. And so this is a concern. It's a concern that this area, which holds enormous promise, that consumers are going to be put off because they think that this is too risky. If your thermostat is connected to the internet, or your fridge, or whatever, your baby phone, and suddenly it's being used, it's being hacked, that's something that people will certainly not be happy about. So we need to increase the cybersecurity of connected objects, and therefore we're working on standards on certification and labeling. There's also a market element here. If we don't have like a European certification system and labeling system, you will get all kind of national systems, and the product might be more secure, but you will have a problem with the trade within the European Union. That's also something we're trying to do by September of this year. This is complicated. People are really working as hard as they can. Platforms, it's something that I deal with directly. Important. You don't need to be convinced of that. 2 issues we've been looking at now for, say, the last year and a half, 2 years. One we call fairness, This is the relation. I mean, platforms have become the gateways. They've become the real intermediaries between those who want to sell to customers and the customers. There's the platform in between. Take a marketplace like Amazon that sits in between the company that sells on Amazon and the consumer that sells through or buys through Amazon. I'm just calling Amazon here not because now I'm going to say there's a lot of problems related to Amazon, just Amazon by way of example. But we found problems from the public consultation which we conducted. We did a very detailed survey of 3,500 companies. We did a lot of kind of stakeholder workshops, and we found a number of problems in the platform to business relationship. We call this P2B. And these problems are, I mean, there's of course very positive things as well, but let's now concentrate maybe on the things that are a little less positive, is that the terms and conditions are relatively one-sided. We all have this own experience. You tick the box and then you can use the service. It's the same if you're an SME. If you want to be on a platform, you tick the box. These terms and conditions are non-negotiable. They are often changed overnight. You're not getting any information about the changes. We see situations where web shops are closed or products delisted. There's no information given to the SME or to the company why that is the case. We see platforms that compete directly with the SMEs on the same products, platforms that of course have a lot of data, including on what the SME is selling and the prices, so maybe they use some of that data to actually undercut the SME. So there's quite a number of issues. One other issue that we found is that it is very difficult to settle disputes. Very few, if any, of these platforms have actually internal dispute settlement. So what you get is you send a complaint and you hear nothing. That's a quite widespread problem. And certainly the disputes aren't kind of independently settled. And what we also find that in many cases the jurisdiction where if you want to go to court, you actually have to go to court outside of Europe, in most cases to California, which if you're an SME, is probably not what you want to do. So those are the issues we're now looking at. The Commission has said, well, we keep all the options open, but it is likely that some of these problems can only be resolved through legislation. So we are preparing an instrument, most likely part of it will be legislative, before the end of the year that deals with some of these practices. Some of these unfair practices, maybe some of the transparency that we would like to see, and certainly one of the issues that is in scope is dispute settlement. How can we make sure that these problems can be settled, hopefully in an amicable way? And we look in that connection, of course, also at the issue of jurisdiction. The other issue we're looking at, we call that responsibility, is like what role do platforms have to play in today's society? I mean, we all read about fake news, terrorism, hate speech, I mean, child abuse material, and you see, I mean, yesterday or the day before, the UK and Macron and Theresa May discussed this. I mean, there's a law in Germany going through the Bundestag at the moment, so this is a very important political issue, and so we're looking at that issue and how kind of we can kind of contribute to making the internet a safer environment. One area we're looking at particularly we call notice and action, which is once a platform has been given or has been notified, has been informed that there is a problem, what then does it need to do in order to remove that kind of illegal or harmful material? And there's different procedures and different kind of rules across the EU, so there's like a fragmentation problem, and of course because we operate in a global market, if content in one member state has to be taken down in 24 hours, but it can stay up for much longer, or in another member state, the effectiveness of the takedown is more limited. So that's what we are looking at, the removal of illegal content through notice and action. Of course, we have to be very mindful of the fundamental rights. I mean, one of the discussions at the moment in Germany is about if you are too tough on the platforms, or you impose or you threaten to impose very heavy fines, like 25 million, will they not over-remove? Will they not say, look, we better be safe than sorry, so we better remove a little bit too much than to run the risk of being fined by a government? So the kind of freedom of speech, the public expression is, of course, very, very important. We also want to give some guidance on what we call Good Samaritan. I mean, the platforms are in this kind of often paradoxical situation, and as long as they have no actual knowledge, they're not liable for the content on their platform. As soon as they have actual knowledge, they become liable. And therefore, there is a little bit of a disincentive for platforms to take proactive action, because they might find something if they kind of do this proactive action and suddenly make themselves liable. And this is something that we want to kind of clarify, that there's still a lot that platforms can do short of kind of imposing liability on themselves. So that's the Good Samaritan clauses, good practices, and all of this again by the end of this year. So there's a lot of work going on in the Commission on this. Skills, I mean, the challenge of our days. I mean, this is a monumental challenge that we are facing in Europe. We're only at the beginning of the kind of the real digital revolution. I mean, and there's a lot we don't know. I mean, if you look at studies of the OECD or you look at some academic studies, one thing that you can conclude is that actually nobody knows what the impact of digital is going to be on the labor market, but we know it's going to be a substantive impact. Certain tasks will be kind of done in future by software, by computers. We already see it in sectors like insurance or financial services. So we really have an enormous challenge ahead of us to prepare our workforce, our general population, for the changes that are coming, and of course also to help those who are kind of seeing their jobs or certain parts of their jobs kind of taken over by robots or by software, to make sure that we can kind of reactivate them so that they don't fall by the wayside or fall through the cracks. I mean, that would be an important social objective and also economic objective, because the absurdity in Europe is, of course, we've got still high unemployment in many member states, but if you look for ICT skills, I mean, you have a very hard time to fill your position. So here we work very much with the member states, very much with the industry through the Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition, through the national coalitions, also through practical projects that we try to pilot and then scale up, and particularly using the European Social Fund. So this is an absolutely critical, daunting challenge that we are facing, and not just in Europe. Digital health, well, there's enormous potential here for containing the rapidly rising healthcare cost in Europe. We have an aging population, so healthcare costs are moving up. To improve the quality of healthcare, and therefore improve the quality of health of the European population, have more kind of healthy life years, and at the same time to promote enormous innovation in this area. I mean, we have a very dynamic, thriving startup community in Europe, and a lot of the kind of startups are in this area in Europe. So there is a win-win-win if we get it right. Again, this is something that, of course, the member states are in the driving seat on, but we think we can help, we can kind of provide some additional benefits. One is, for example, to allow cross-border health records to be accessed. I mean, if now something happens, when, God forbid, to us here in Malta, I mean, you have to go to the hospital. I mean, the doctors have no clue what kind of your health situation or your health condition is. So if you could have immediate access to your health record and show it to the medical profession, that is a very positive thing and likely to contribute to better outcomes. The same with e-prescriptions. You happen to be abroad, you might have forgotten your prescriptions, you need prescriptions. I mean, you can get it electronically. You go to the first pharmacy and you get your medication. High-performance computing. I mean, we used to be really good in Europe in high-performance computing, and that's not very long ago. So 10 years ago, we were really good at high-performance computing. But the last 10 years, we have dropped down on there's actually a kind of a top 30, top 40 of high-performance computing ranking, which is published every couple of months. And the highest in Europe is now in number 9, in Jülich, in Germany. Then we have one in number 16, one in number 18, and we're on our way down. This is the trend. This cannot continue. And if you are number 9 compared to number 1, which is China, I mean, it's a comparison between a Ferrari and a Kia Picanto. I mean, it's a kind of a multiple. If you are behind, you're really behind. You're still in a car, but it's certainly no comparison to the car that the others are driving. So here we need to step up our game. This is something that we need to do together. No single member state has the capacity to kind of get us back into the top 3, and we need to do that together. We have a plan. Member states are kind of coming behind this plan. 7 member states signed a declaration in Rome a couple of months ago to start a really big project. I mean, I always hesitate to call Galileo because some people are put off by the term Galileo, certainly in Brussels, but it's like a Galileo for high-performance computing, a project of about 5 billion euros, where if we are successful, we'll be back in the top 3 by 2023, and we will have also an industry, so we're not just dependent on technology from third countries. Here we are. How are we doing on time? We need to move up quicker. So this is the high-performance computing. This is the connectivity. Without connectivity, nothing works. There's no digital single market. There's only an analog single market. So that's absolutely critical. E-government. Governments should kind of put their best foot forward. I mean, we too, as a European Commission, we always kind of tell the member states what they need to do, but there's also something that we can do much better. The once-only principle is quite a promising principle for which there is a lot of support amongst the member states. So if you have to submit a piece of paper to your administration, they shouldn't come back and ask you to submit it again. Once they have it, and they need it maybe for another purpose, they need to make sure that they can move it to the purpose for which it was intended. Digitizing European industry. Big challenge here is to get the small and medium-sized enterprises up. I mean, they're in value chains with big companies that are digitizing. If they're not digitizing at the same time, they might be thrown out of these value chains. So it's very important that they move too. International. We had the international panel. Of course, we are looking very much what's happening in Europe, but we must look what's happening around the world. How are we doing? We must compare ourselves with the rest of the world. And in some respects, we're ahead. At least some of our member states are ahead. In other respects, we are behind. The digital single market is obviously critical, and it's critical in a number of respects because it does give us the scale and therefore also the speed. And you heard Ruben Ritter, etc. I mean, our startups need this scale to move, to become scale-ups. But it's also important, and let us not forget that Europe has always or very often been a model, a regulatory model for the rest of the world. If you look at our telecoms regulation, for example, or audiovisual policy or e-commerce policy, I mean, it has been copied by a lot of third countries around the world, so which is good, also good for our businesses because they have to operate within an environment that they know very well. So that's an ambition. I mean, we're moving in some areas. We're very mindful of moving in we're breaking new ground. I mean, we go into the data flows. We're going into some difficult legal concepts around data. We're looking into platforms. We're going to legislate in that area. We must get it right, but I mean, and we're convinced we will get it right in Europe, but then of course it becomes like a benchmark for the rest of the world, and the rest of the world will look at it as data protection has become a benchmark for the rest of the world. And this is therefore also a way of kind of projecting European values across the world, so that we should not underestimate, say, the influence and the interest of third countries in what we do in Europe in the digital single market. I think that's it. So that leaves 15 minutes for questions, and then we need to rush to the reception and reward ourselves with a beer, a glass of wine, and no doubt a beautiful view, and then some music as well from the Maltese, what is it, the police marching band, something like that, I don't know. Maybe I should not have broken, I should not have said this, but but they are coming, so maybe play the European anthem, who knows. Are there any questions or comments? Or do you all want to? There's a question here.
Are there any areas that you personally see are not in the scope that should be? Or things on the horizon that we should be looking for at the next review?
Well, I think there are areas that kind of, I mean, we know, we can see them. I mean, like artificial intelligence, for example, we can see that becoming more and more important and raising policy issues. I mean, this is going to raise policy issues. That's clear. I mean, some of the issues may even be ethical issues, but I mean, like in e-commerce, another area I'm responsible for. I mean, you can use artificial intelligence to sell the same product for a different price to different consumers at the same time. I mean, we're about to conclude the geo-blocking regulation, which says you should not discriminate between people who are in different member states. So if you have a fantastic offer, it's not just for French people. If UK people or German people want to have that offer, they should be accessing that offer. But with artificial intelligence, we might get to a situation where really the pricing will be individualized. So, and that's something I think we need to think about. So it's in scope, but it's a bit like these issues that kind of 2 or 3 years ago, we saw them, but we didn't have all the elements. We hadn't yet kind of done sufficient analysis. We hadn't talked to enough people about it. So those are certainly issues we will be looking at. I mean, blockchain, another issue. I mean, very important. We mention it in the communication. We see great promise in these areas, but we don't know yet what our role will be or needs to be. I mean, not that we want to over-regulate, absolutely not, but I would be surprised if these transformative, very disruptive developments don't throw up policy issues. Be the first time in history if that's the case. Yeah, there's a microphone.
Thank you. Daniel Fiedler from Sky, but I want to raise an issue of concern from the European creative sectors, which is obviously we've been at the heart of a lot of the DSM package. A lot of it has been well-intentioned from the get-go, but we've seen that on a lot of the files, they aren't really helping the sector or to create more European champions in the creative space. Some of the files are probably going to end up hurting our sectors. We've seen that the MOU process on protecting IP online, for example, from Amazon is starting to go in a direction that is not going to be very fruitful. We've seen in the DSM midterm review that there has been a pullback from some of the promises made at the beginning on trying to enforce IP more and protect European creators. So I have 2 questions. First is on the notice in action, which we were sad to see is only guidance and not a bit stronger. Do you include IP in the definition of illegal content? Because it's one thing you didn't mention. And the second thing is, what can you or we do to actually get the EU institutions and the Commission especially to do more and in a more ambitious way to protect our sectors and our content creation, which is at the heart of why people are using digital technology? Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure I agree with the word protect. I think we need to empower you. We should not be protecting. I mean, those who protect in this digital age where there's a lot of disruption are likely the ones who are going to fall behind. So I think it's important we see also the opportunities of the digital change and not just the threats coming from it. And I'm fully aware, because I dealt with copyright until very recently, of the kind of massive changes and indeed risks and threats, but at the same time, there's also, I think, a need and an opportunity to look at your business model and to see how you can evolve these business models in a way which are beneficial to your company, obviously, to the creative sector in Europe, but also beneficial to the users and the consumers. I mean, I dealt with telecoms beforehand, and I've never understood why, how in a sector you can be operating and most of your customers are unhappy with the service and the product you provide. I mean, you like to operate. Well, I think this is to a certain extent they're very happy, but we've got Vice President Ansip who constantly reminds us that if we see you can't access this content because the rights have not been cleared in your member state, consumers get frustrated. At the same time, I think what we have put forward in terms of proposals is a balanced proposal. I think we've also recognized the importance of the value gap and to make sure that the creators are adequately remunerated. This is an ecosystem. The ecosystem needs to be healthy. If the ecosystem is disrupted because a lot of the value accrues in one part of the ecosystem and it is actually withdrawn from another part of the ecosystem is not sustainable, and therefore it will not be sustained over time. Of course, we're in a political negotiation at the moment, and I'm sure and I know that you are very actively engaged in that political negotiation, and I think we have to trust that the political negotiations will produce, because there's always checks and balances. That's why, I mean, we're in a democracy, that's why things take time in Europe, because there's checks and balances. I mean, where there's an extreme position on the one hand, there's an extreme position on the other hand. We've seen it with roaming. It took 10 years to get it done. So I'm less pessimistic. There's a lot of kind of, in the negotiation, posturing. I mean, you put a very kind of radical position forward in order to kind of attract attention and to create a bit of leverage in the negotiations. So I don't think the Commission is squarely behind the creative sector. It's one of the strongest sectors that, and it's a sector that we have to be very proud of, and not just economically, but culturally. I mean, this is the richness, the diversity of Europe. So we absolutely need to empower and support the sector. On the notice and action and on the IPR enforcement, I mean, this is important. I mean, that was actually an interesting judgment today from the Court of Justice that no doubt you're aware of. I mean, we need to go hand in hand. I mean, I think what we've done in the past is maybe to have done too much on the enforcement side, and I think we all know, I don't have to be very explicit to say like what kind of reaction there has been politically, and not enough on the kind of the making content more available side. And I think we need to take those two. It's a bit like walking. You need to use both legs in order to walk, and you can't just walk on one leg. But the enforcement one is very important. I mean, on notice and action, I mean, we're still working on the content. I mean, illegal content should include also copyright if it's illegally kind of communicated to the public. At the same time, we also know that there are quite effective mechanisms already in place between the industry and the platforms. And so one thing we absolutely don't want to do is to disrupt something that works. We want to fix something that doesn't work. We don't want to fix or unfix something that works. But that's certainly within scope and under consideration. On the general IPR enforcement, I mean, the Commission is working on this. I'm sure there'll be something coming out of the Commission in the next 6 months or so.
I'm Jari-Pekka Kaleva from the European Games Developer Federation. And for a long time, game developers have been figuring out how to implement GDPR. And it was for a long time in quite a conflict with the Digital Contracts Directive that is now going in a better direction. At the same time, we are now related to GDPR also figuring out questions related to consent that are also popping up into e-privacy discussions. And now we have a layer of a data economy package on top of it. And for a long time there has been certain, let's say, miscoordination between these legislative packages. How are you going to secure that in the future there is better coordination so that we can achieve this kind of unified, well-coordinated, non-fragmented regulatory framework? Because for game developers, these are not separate packages.
Yes.
Form a unified environment you have to implement in the single game, and it's very difficult it's very hard to predict where the regulatory framework is actually going and how it is going to work.
Yeah. Let's maybe take, because I'm just mindful of the time, the last thing I want to do is to take you out of the, or to delay you with the reception. So maybe one more question, I think, over here.
Yes. Good afternoon. Anne Bergmantel from the Federation of European Publishers. We're very grateful that you're looking at platform and unfair contractual rules. There's one thing we're missing in the entire exercise is interoperability. There's today the largest platforms selling ebooks. They are imposing their own format, meaning that readers wanting to buy from other retailers. I know you're aware of the issue. So is this something that the EU can at some point tackle, look into the interoperability issue?
Yeah. Maybe start with the kind of the coherence, which is tremendously important, is that kind of not just coherent within a piece of legislation, but coherent between different pieces of legislation, because the internet is all about convergence. Whatever you do in one area has therefore a spillover effect in another area. We need to be very careful that the regulatory framework recognizes that. The advantage in a way, if there is that it's all done by the Commission, all the proposals. Within the Commission, it's about 80% done by DG Connect. We talk, we try to kind of align as much as possible. I mean, I think we've done quite a good job so far in terms of consistency. We now need to maintain that consistency as the negotiations shift to the Council and the Parliament. And this is where sometimes we see tensions, that there's a parliamentary amendment which kind of might have an impact on another measure or is inconsistent with another measure that has just been agreed. So that's a challenge. And we're mindful of it. I mean, I can't promise for 100% we will always get it right, but it's something that we pay an awful lot of attention to, because we don't want a regulatory environment where it becomes difficult. We want to make things easier. I mean, that's the whole point about a digital single market. It should be one market, one set of rules. You wouldn't have to worry like, well, what are the rules in another member state? And if we manage that, that's a good step. But if you then have to worry like, well, if I do what I do here, is that consistent with another EU instrument? I mean, that would be really, really bad if that's the end outcome. So I think the point is well noted. We are very mindful of our responsibility in this area. We are working very closely. I mean, we use this argument a lot towards the European Parliament and the Council to say, well, that's not a good idea, or I would not support that amendment. And hopefully we'll maintain that kind of discipline until the end. On the platforms, I mean, one issue we're looking at is the portability, interoperability of data. A lot of operators, SMEs on the platform, are not allowed to use the data, even not allowed to get in touch with their customers. Sometimes they don't even have control about the data that kind of concerns their transactions, and they're also, in some cases, not allowed to take the data and move it to another platform. So to enrich, say, their customer experience on another platform by using the data that was generated on another platform. So this is within scope. I'm not sure at all, because the e-books issue is a very particular issue, also with kind of standards that are being applied and imposed. So I'm not saying this will solve the e-books issue, but we're looking at the interoperability issue. We want to have a system where, I mean, you can actually move around. You're not tied in, you're not kind of locked into a particular solution. You can actually, if you are dissatisfied with the service, you can move to another service. So those are, I think, in a nutshell, issues we're looking at. We're very keen to continue to interact with you. We have not found the stone of wisdom yet. We're still looking for it. I suspect it's not in Beaulieu. But if you have found the stone of wisdom, then please come and talk with us, because we're very, very interested. So in the next couple of course, we are busy drafting impact assessments and kind of initial legal drafts. So we are very busy. It's not that we can kind of spend all of our time engaging with stakeholders, but we're certainly open. And if you want to send us something, it will get our full attention. We'll organize some further kind of expert workshops, etc. on this. So don't hesitate. We're always interested to work with you and to listen to your concerns. I think it's 7:14. No, is that the Martin? You should say something, Martin. He's just sitting there. You may have wondered what is the third chair for. I don't know. I have no idea. But
I've been watching the kind of bullets coming, and Gerard dealing very well answering the questions. But just a general remark, I think it was raised from the first question as well. I think two things just to complement what Gerard was saying. We're increasingly seeing in the digital field that digital is clearly not some discrete sort of area of policy à part, and the more that energy and finance and health comes within the purview of digital, or rather it becomes digital itself, the more it's raising digital type issues. At the moment, it's very low key, but it's the first time, I think, in a kind of digital paper. And if you read our very interesting staff working document, which accompanies our DSM review, where we cooperated a lot with the sectors, you will see how much of a crossover there is with the key fields, which, coming back to the point about, for example, the creative sector, where we want to leverage our strengths in Europe. And so clearly then, this is one of our key messages from the DSM strategy, and it's in about the second paragraph. We want to unlock the value of the data economy, we have to ensure that we're leveraging our key assets, our areas where we're very, very strong. That's health, that's energy, that's transport. And there's some very, I should say, strong orientations in the DSM strategy. So in short, the more those sectoral areas become digitized, the more there may be call for new measures that we coordinate better. It's not out of any enthusiasm to legislate, but they will raise issues themselves. And secondly, as we get further down the road with the transformation of, well, the digitization of all our industries, and Hera was signaling them in the early slide, and things like artificial intelligence that raise ethical issues, etc. As technology progresses, they're going to throw up inevitably more questions that may or may not require intervention from the regulators and may or may not require intervention at a European level. And just the final point is that I think one of the most important aspects of the DSM is that we haven't legislated for the sake of it. We haven't regulated for the sake of it. We have regulated either where we see a problem that calls for a European solution, or where we feel that a particular area of policy or sector definitely benefits from European intervention. And just to finish on the example of the car sector, you may find buried within the text of the DSM is this agreement between member states, I think 7 member states, plus a number of others, to run these pilot projects to get connected and automated driving running, building these corridors. And it's only when it's done at the European level where you have the authorization, where you have the experimental space, where you can set up sort of a regime for the liability, plus public money and private money. And that is an example of real European value add. And I think that more of those pilot-type projects that start small but need some European intervention and supervision, those are the sorts of things I hope we can see in the future in Europe adding its value. So not just legislating, but really creating value and experimenting and trying with the whole European support and structure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. And have a nice evening. Reward yourself.
Get some